Good afternoon, Steve.
Good afternoon.
First and foremost, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down to get
My
your story
pleasure.
on record. Were you drafted or did you enlist in the Army?
I was drafted.
All right. And where were you living at the time?
I was living in Baltimore City.
Is that where you're from originally?
Originally, yes, born and raised in Baltimore City.
Right.
Now reside here in Carroll County.
All right, you ended up going to the Army, if that wasn't by choice, because of the draft?
Yes, the day that I was inducted, every fourth man had to fall out and was being sent to Parris Island and was being drafted into the Marine Corps. So I happened to be a number 3 number, so I ended up in the Army.
Got it. Understood. Tell us about those first days in service, getting down to boot camp.
Well, I took boot camp in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and it was 9 weeks long. And, it was kind of a new experience for me there. I had never been away from home like that and on my own, so to speak. I went to college locally here to the University of Baltimore, so I lived at home. And here you are with a bunch of people that are from all over, basically the East Coast and the South. And
Yes.
So it was a conglomerate of people and personalities and different experience that way.
From all walks of life.
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned boot camp, and what were the highlights? What experiences would you don't forget either about your interaction amongst each other in the platoon or your instructors?
Well, the instructors back in 1969 could pretty much do anything they wanted to you, so they were always up in your face and cut you no slack and rode you hard. And probably the most memorable thing was the last week of boot camp, where the orders come down as to what your MOS is going to be. And I got an 11 Bravo MOS, and I didn't know what that was. So, drill sergeant, what's 11 Bravo? And he just starts laughing at me and says, boy, you're going to die. That's infantry. You're going to Vietnam. So that was a
shocker, I believe.
Yes, sir, it was.
In being drafted, finding yourself away from home in recruit training, what the instructor told you about the MOS and where you're going, how did you get through all that?
Just pride and prayer.
Pride and prayer.
Yes.
All right. So you graduated from boot camp. You went to...
I went to advanced infantry training at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and spent 8 weeks there. And by this time, obviously, you're accustomed to Army life, and as far as friendships, you've already learned that you don't make lasting friendships. However, I did make one in advanced infantry, and we stayed in contact. He was a guy from Lackawanna, New York, and he went to Vietnam directly from AIT. And
how about you?
I went to Fort Carson, Colorado. I ended up in the 5th Mechanized Unit there, which was a tank division. Why that happened, I have no idea. But after being there for about 4 months, I did come down on a levy to go to Vietnam. And so I did go to Vietnam as an infantryman then. So.
Understood. Now, you were in infantry. You experienced a lot of combat?
I experienced my share of it, yes.
Now, with the unit you were with, is it a unit that took a lot of casualties? You lost a lot of your friends?
Yes, I was assigned obviously to the 1st Air Cav, which was one of the units that I didn't want any part of when I got notice that I was going to Vietnam, because again, through basic and AIT, a lot of the drill instructors were, either ex-Cav or ex-101st Airborne, and they all had anywhere from 1 to 3 Purple Hearts on them. So when I got assigned to the 1st Cav, it was like, no, this is not what I want.
Shocker?
Yes, to say the least.
All right. Well, now tell us about the most memorable experiences you had, good or bad.
Well, war creates both. There was a time that, again, I guess it must have been, I was in country maybe about 8 months, and at that point, the friend that I had made in AIT, he was in the 25th Infantry Division, and they were standing down and going home at that point. And my first sergeant and had a friend that was also in that outfit. So we were able to get over to Kuchi one evening that he was able to, obviously, to requisition a Jeep. And we drove over to Kuchi, and we went our separate ways. And I partied that night with
With your
my
buddy?
friend there. Yes.
Wow, that's outstanding.
Yes.
And see him off back to
Right.
the States.
Right.
All right. Any awards? Any citations?
I was awarded the Combat Infantryman's Badge, CIB, 2 Bronze Stars and an Army Commendation Medal.
Wow, that's a lot.
I was young and stupid.
Do you wish to comment on any of those?
Not at this time. I just did what I was supposed to do and what anybody else would do.
Follow orders.
Yes.
All right. Now, in the midst of your experiences in Vietnam, how did you stay in touch with your loved ones? I know it was hard on you to leave home.
Back in those days, they had cassette tapes. And so I would hump around a little cassette recorder, and I would send these tapes back in home, and they would record on them and send them back to me. And of course, you had the United States Mail Service as well. And at that point, of course, postage was free for us in a combat zone, so it didn't matter. You could write on the back of a C rations box and just write a little note and write free on there with your return address and send it on home.
All right, Steve, I know you didn't have that cuisine from back home, and if you needed something, you would go to a grocery store or somewhere. Tell us about how was the food, and did you have everything you needed back in country?
Well, there's 2 stories. One is when I first got there, C rations I could handle, eat. They weren't bad. And then about a third of the way through there, I started writing Mom and Dad and telling them to send me hot sauce, Heinz 57 sauce, anything at all to put on this stuff. And
Give us some flavor?
Yes. And by the time I was ready to come home, no matter what I put on those C's, it didn't make any difference anymore. And one other thing was that in the line company there, we had a colonel that when you left a fire base, you kind of knew what you were going into by what was for dessert. If you got ice cream at the end of the line, you knew you were going into a hot LZ the next day. So
That was a
that
sign.
was his way of trying to make it easy for us that
Start
you got
getting to that
ice cream.
mindset.
Yes, yes. So
Very unusual way, but it worked.
yes, yes.
Now, knowing that and probably a lot of stress, talk to us the pressure of stress in combat, everything you did, all the responsibilities you had.
Well, the one thing that I'm proud of is as a squad leader, nobody died on me. That's first and foremost. Then secondly, at that point, I didn't spend a full 12 months strictly humping out in the bush as a grunt, but I got appointed as a Kit Carson Scout NCOIC.
And what is that?
Kit Carson Scouts were former Viet Cong and VA regulars that gave up and came to our side. Now, the problem with that was some really truly believed that they were fighting for a losing cause, and others felt it was a nice way of infiltrating American GIs and knowing where and what. And, then they would just disappear with the information, and we were all compromised out there. So as the NCOIC, obviously I was in charge of all of the scouts for the entire division. And so it was kind of a hectic pace there to
Big
keep track.
responsibility.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And again, trying to weed out who were legitimate and who were not. So it was a tough issue at that point.
Tough
there.
task.
Yes, it was. And again, at the point where in '71, when I was coming home and getting ready to come out, I guess it was the end of '70 and into early '71, that the Vietnamization pacification program went into high effect out there, and troops were coming home. They were trying to de-strengthen the force, if you will, out there. So what would happen is they would turn over all the American arms and equipment and supplies to the local villages. And at that point, because all of this material was going to the villages, and I was with the head scout, we would have to go out and teach these villagers how to defend themselves and set up ambushes and NDPs and the like out there.
Pretty much to be, military or do infantry stuff.
Oh, yes, yeah, right. And that's why it was, just a natural fit for me to, just go right into that. And, I'm going to say probably 99% of the time I was the only GI, American GI, with all of these Vietnamese people around me. So my life pretty much was in my own hands except for the head scout.
Understood. Now, with everything, other responsibilities you had, is there any ritual you did for good luck? Did you carry anything around that would?
I carried a rosary that my dad had carried in World War II, and when I went in, he gave me the rosary, and I wouldn't call it necessarily a good luck piece, but again, I prayed a lot, obviously, and so at one point I lost the rosary, and when I realized that I had lost it back at a certain village, I went up to the platoon sergeant and told him about it. And I said I wanted to go back and look, and he cut me the slack, let me go back to the Ville. Of course, I had a certain time to meet him at a certain place then, or else, that was it. I was completely on my own. But I went back to the Ville, and I couldn't find it. And at that point, I guess that was probably the lowest point that I had in Vietnam, because it was a part of my dad. It was something that I, used hard, and turn around, and I thought for sure that, my time was up at that point then. So
Understood. With everything going on with the war and always with the with the adrenaline rushing, is there anything you all did for entertainment amongst each other? Did anybody come out there from any entertainers to kind of break up a little bit?
Well, to keep my mom and dad, when I was leaving for Vietnam, I would joke that I was going to get to see Bob Hope in person. And little did I know that not everybody gets to see Bob Hope. And what they did was they had allotments to each line company. And 2 people were, set to go. And from my unit there, everybody's name got put into a hat.
It was like a lottery?
Yes.
Okay.
And that lottery I won. And turned around and my name got picked. And at the time I was humping the 60 machine gun. And then the second name pulled was my assistant gunner. So that was kind of neat because the 2 of us got to go together. And of course, everybody thought that it was rigged, but it really wasn't. Not to our knowledge, anyhow.
Luck of the draw.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Now, after service, you got back. Tell us about your first day back, your weeks. How'd you feel?
Well, when I got back home, in the whole time basically that I was in the service, the 2 years, I was engaged to my wife, and within 45 days afterwards, and of course all this had been pre-planned, but I got married 45 days later. And even during those first 45 days, yeah, there were times where I was kind of lost. I didn't feel right being at home and that sort of thing. That, as weird as this sounds, that I didn't belong back here in the world, that, my place was still back in Vietnam. But
would you say did you have any guilt of coming back and you were alive and your friends weren't?
Yes, I carry the survivor's guilt with me. Like I said, not that I lost anybody, but there were people that I knew were on the wall and got shot up bad and whatever.
Understood. Now, you were engaged to your wife, you got married. That's great. How many years you been married?
I'm going to say 46.
46. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Did you come back to Baltimore, obviously?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Did you work or did you go to school?
No, I had already graduated from college there. During my 4 years of college, I had received my school deferment, 2S deferment, and about a month before graduation from college, they reclassified me back to 1A, and about within 2 months after I graduated, it was when I got my draft notice that President Nixon sent to me saying, welcome.
You mentioned reclassification 1A. Can you explain that?
In those days, 1A, yeah, today there is no draft, but in those days, when you were 18 and you registered for the draft, you were classified 1A. And there were other classifications down the category there, but 2S was where if you were in school full-time, you could apply for a deferment. And, the 4 years that I was in college, I would apply for that. And then, like I said, and again, this was before the days of the lottery on top of it. I had beat the lottery. I say beat it. The lottery came in to play after I was already drafted.
Understood.
So, it was just whatever the draft board needed. That's how they would just, at random, I guess, pick who they wanted and sent the notices out. And the only other, other classification that I was aware of was 4F, which meant that you were physically unable to join the military. So those are the only 3 classifications I remember.
Well, thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
Now, being either during basic training in Vietnam, you make good friends, I assume. You get bonds. Do you stay in contact with them? Have a relationship with
There was
your fellow
one
GIs?
friend that I had in Vietnam that, you know, I'd see him. It's not on a regular basis or that we're in contact regularly, but it's been about 3 years last time that we saw each other. And like I said, there's this friend that I made in advanced infantry training. When he went to Vietnam right away after AIT, we met up, like I said, at Cu Chi there. So that was really the only 2 people that I had gotten really close to. And even at that, like I said, Stan from the 25th Infantry there, he's deceased now, and Bob was in the 1st Cav with me, and you just never wanted to get that close to somebody. And, you know, I learned that very early on in basic training, and it just stuck with me, so.
Okay. All right. And when you get back, when you got back to the States, did you want to continue serving? Did you join any veteran service organizations or what?
No, I didn't want to remain in the military, obviously, because of the experiences that I had. That's not to say that I'm anti-military. I just don't want to see anybody's son have to experience what I experienced out there. And, you know, in a peacetime military, yeah, it might be great. The old adage was, and I guess this comes from World War II or Korea, but you know, the military makes a man out of you was the phrase that was used a lot.
Yes.
And in my case, it made an old man out of me very quickly. And so as far as that goes, I didn't want anything more to do with the military. I had a neighbor that was very big in the American Legion, and that was back in Baltimore City. And I was like, you know, the first Vietnam veteran to join Mahul Potts Post number 2 in Baltimore.
Oh, wow.
In that particular post there. And again, that was then able to, I did that mostly because then my dad and my father-in-law, you know, then came in with me. So it was a nice bonding situation between my 2 dads at that point and myself. So, you know, once a month we'd always make sure we got together for that. So that was kind of neat.
Oh, that's outstanding. That's awesome.
Yes.
Now, what did you go on to do as a career after the war? What was your niche?
I ended up becoming involved in the insurance industry, and I worked as in the claims department, and you know, did pretty much everything as far as estimating houses, barns, garages, farms, cars. You know, so I had done it all there. So
How many years did you do that?
until I became unable to do it because of medical reasons.
Yes.
I did it for over 30 years.
30 years.
Yes.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about the war or the military in general?
Well, I never debated whether or not we should have been in Vietnam, but in 1969 and certainly in 1970 when I was there, my debate was whether I should have been there. And I don't mean that me personally, I mean that the U.S. involvement, that we should have either been there and gone or not been there at all. As far as the military overall, it's a necessary evil, especially in today's world. And my hat is off to all of today's warriors, male and female. They pay a price, I think, that's much higher than what I paid. I just did one tour of duty at 365 days. Many of today's warriors are doing 2, 3, 4, 6 tours of duty. They're more in a combat zone than they are at home. So I worry about them. I pray for them. I look at my situation, but this country does not know PTSD. This is something that came about per the Vietnam veteran, but give this country another 20, 30 years, and these veterans of today, it's impossible to do that sort of thing and not be affected, if not today, down the road. And the only thing I would say is to anybody today serving, especially when you get out, go see the VA or go see somebody, talk to somebody. Don't do like I did and a lot of my friends today that waited 30, 40 years before we went and talked to someone, because it will help you.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and that is very real in today's military.
Thank you.
How did your service and experiences affect your life directly?
Well, again, as I said, it made an old man out of me early on. I learned that the simple things in life can give you the pleasure. A cold glass of water is outstanding. Life is precious. Life is short. Family is everything. Without, I think, the love and the support that I got from my wife to begin with, first and foremost, and my family, I don't know that you and I would be sitting here today talking. I'd either probably been dead or in jail, just because of the mentality that I had at 21, 22 years of age, and with the experience behind me. So
Changed you forever.
yes, it did. Yes, it did. So.
Well, Steve, once again, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down to tell us
Appreciate it.
your story.